All right, well, thanks for showing up. I'm going to try hard not to make my little teasing prediction this morning come true. It's a little weird being recorded. It's not something I'm used to. It makes me actually more nervous than people in the room. My name is Greg Jensen. I'm the VP of Software Engineering at CDS Global. And I'm really, let's do a little qualification. I don't really consider myself to be an expert, and I have no aspirations to be a guru or a tech celebrity someday. I'm more of a Forrest Gump type. I've been around a while, but more important than my aging process, I've just been everywhere. I don't know what it is. I get bored. Maybe I feel undervalued or unappreciated. I get distracted by something new or some new opportunity. I'm a sucker for recruiting phone calls. For some reason, I have had a lot of different jobs in a lot of different states. And I've seen a lot. And despite what I think is a ridiculously varied resume, it's still a small sample size. So it's still heavily biased by my own experience. And it certainly pales in comparison to the aggregate experience represented in this room. So I hope that as you hear something that doesn't quite sit right with you, or if you have an alternative or something to augment the topic or an example with, I hope you just jump in. I don't get rattled very easily, so I'm not concerned about being pushed off pace or being driven off onto a tangent. Whatever I get a sense that is worthwhile for you, I'm happy to head in that direction. So this is my first run at this. This is all kind of new material, if you will. I hope it comes together okay. It's kind of a difficult topic to really do justice to in an hour, so I'm going to emphasize more of the first part than the second. So there's two elements here. We'll talk a little bit about how to build advocacy within your organization. And I mentioned the C-suite, but the reality is it's wherever your senior stakeholders are that have the ability to make your life happy or miserable, or to fund or defund, or to provide cover or not provide cover for what is sometimes a very delicate process of transforming to Agile delivery, or just simply trying to honestly embrace Agile concepts. So first, a little context. You have to really think about your own attitude and mindset, your relationship with your executive sponsors. Do you hold them up high on a pedestal, or are you nervous to engage them? Do you think they're overcompensated and ineffectual? That's probably a common theme. There's all kinds of different general relationships that you have to think about and how you're going to navigate that. I can only assure you of one thing, which is everyone is always happy in the beginning. Someone reads a brochure, someone writes a check, someone sees episode 1, season 1 of Agile, normally Agile Scrum. People get certified, there are certificates flying around. It's a joyous occasion that we're all embracing Agile. And then, life happens. And as the expression goes, shit happens. And there are deadlines, there are pressure, there are mistakes, fumbles, all kinds of things that drive everybody off the happy path. And then, even though we know better, we start to capitulate. We yield, we stumble, we stammer, we try to figure out how to satisfy what we know are intense business pressures, or pressures even from an individual manager, depending on his or her style. And in our delicate process of not just following an Agile methodology, but trying to inject the real Agile culture into our teams, into our colleagues, into our stakeholders. So a deep understanding of Agile is necessary. If you don't have that, you're probably not going to be on point to help your organization stay the course. And that's okay. You're still learning, as I am, as we all are. But some of you do understand what's going on, and you do understand how to apply these principles, and you need to step up and help paint the picture. You need to help executive teams and sponsors understand why it's in everyone's best interest to stay the course, even if there's a lot of early pain and the early results are not as promising as everyone anticipated. And this is just my own pet peeve. Don't spend a lot of time explaining Scrum to senior executives. They really don't care. It does depend on the size of your org and their involvement, but sharing the religion just doesn't get you anywhere. In fact, probably the worst thing you can do is have a senior executive sit in and listen to a product owner read a user story to a team while they figure out how to estimate it. It sounds a little fluffy. It doesn't seem really all that efficient. They're looking at their watch, waiting for velocity to kick in after all these big expenditures. And we're talking about Joe who, hits the red button, and Sue who wants to figure out what the next screen is. It really doesn't build a lot of confidence. They're not going to remember all the ceremonies. They don't really care how it comes together. But there are shared principles and values where you have a lot in common, and this is what you have to drive towards. So first of all, fundamentals. The manifesto does still matter, right? The values, the 12 guiding principles, you really need to feel comfortable that if you don't follow them to the letter, at least you understand what their intent is and how they play in whatever methodology your org's using. It doesn't really matter if you're Scrum or Kanban or Scrumban or Lean or XP or anything else. There's a lot of common concepts that stitch all this together. Here's my take on it, as imperfect as it is. I think all Agile methodologies and frameworks boil down to these 5 basic concepts. The last one's kind of a cheat, and I'll explain it in a minute. But when you think about it, these concepts don't just show up in Agile processes. They show up in a lot of business strategy and a lot of business best practices. My absolute favorite is the first one. You've heard the expression, right? Sunlight is the most effective disinfectant. Sunlight in an organization, you can't even begin to appreciate how big a difference it makes when people actually figure out how to shine sunlight on each other in terms of what they're doing, where they're at, what the impact is, and what it means to the organization. So let's walk through these concepts, and if you can think about a methodology where it doesn't apply at all, or where you think I'm missing something major here after you see this list, then please just throw it out. To me, Sunlight is about all of the information radiators, the backlogs, the plans, the tasks, the tools, everything that we do that make it obvious and make it as public as possible, not just amongst the team, but across other teams and other stakeholders. You want to take the mystery out of the process as much as possible. If you're a senior executive and you're waiting for something to be delivered, every day that goes by where you can't see something, and there's a lot you can't see from most senior positions, it's unnerving. You don't know where your opportunities are to mitigate risk. You don't know when and how you're going to get blindsided. There are a lot of issues to consider here. So our job, in my mind, is to take the mystery out of the process of software engineering and delivery. And I can't emphasize enough, demos, designs, simulations, prototypes, anything you do that helps to build that bridge between talk and working software, anything that shows this evolution or revolution, this progression, crawl, walk, run, however you want to view it, anything that builds that bridge, especially when you see that bridge getting bigger and stronger on an incremental basis, That removes mystery and that builds confidence, and that gives you a lot of cover from senior stakeholders. Focus. Most methodologies are designed to drive focus and discipline into your process. Priorities, sprints, a WIP, a story map, even a use case or a user story. Most executives can really relate to this, even though most of us violate this constantly. In fact, everyone in the room violates this rather constantly, because we're all still convinced that we're multitasking geniuses, and that the more we keep up in the air, the more value we have, and the more flexibility we have to latch on to something that's working and distance ourselves from something that's failing. It's nice to have options. Options aren't good, though, in the world of business. What's really good is an intent, focus, and drive that forces you to either fail or get something done. Lots of great stories out there. You know, Steve Jobs has his annual senior staff meeting. He wants to put 100 ideas on the board, and everyone fights to get an idea up there, and it seems really exciting, and there's all these great things that Apple's going to do for the following year. Then he figures out how to slowly break them down and come up with his top 10 priorities. And then he slashes 7 of them and tells the entire team, these are the 3 things we're going to do this year. That's a whole lot of boiling the ocean to walk away from the beach with 3 things in the bucket. But that's a big part of why he was very successful. Same thing with Warren Buffett. Classic story about Warren talking to, I believe, one of his pilots. You know, his pilot was having some struggles with where he wanted to take his career or to start a business or whatever the case may be. And Warren's like, some stories describe it as 50, others describe it as 25. So Warren says, write down the 25 things that you know are really important to you. And I don't know about you, but when I sit down and come up with my top 20 or 25 things for my professional life, it's real easy to do. There's all kinds of things that I think are important, skills that I need, insights I should develop, networking I should accomplish, connections I should make, things I should do to test myself, to make myself visible, to make myself more versatile, improve my strengths, cover my weaknesses. It goes on forever. The list is easy. I've got a lot of paper shredded all over the place between my home office and my bedroom of scribbling lists at night, figuring out how to get my act together and grow up someday. By the way, I'm 55 now, and I still haven't even come close. I might as well be 25. But the bottom line is, Warren will tell you, take that list, and now write the 5 things that you think are most critical. Write that on a separate list. My favorite part is, it's not good enough to just say, now focus on those 5 things. The classic line is, he says, throw the other list away. Meaning it's baggage, it's junk, it's not going to help you. You don't need a backup, you don't need a substitute ready in the wings. Those 5 things are all you need. It'll probably take you all year to figure out how to do them justice. I don't know of a single IT organization that actually has an appropriate project list on their balance sheet right now. I'll bet every single IT department in America has somewhere between 50 and 200% more projects under management that they're trying to deliver than they should. So that's a challenge for all of us, is to try to find that discipline and then demonstrate that that kind of discipline is really effective. Frequency. Again, this is a common concept. Frequency as in cycle time, as in your harmonic vibration, the mode upon which you have peaks and troughs and go from one note to the other. Cycle time is critical, and I think this is not a universal truth, but my experience in a variety of businesses, industries, and with a variety of Agile teams, and this goes back, by the way, before we even knew what Agile was. My first Agile team was technically at Lockheed Martin's AI group in 1994. None of us knew the term Agile, none of us cared, but there were 5 of us who kind of did what we wanted. And that doesn't mean that Agile is about going rogue or being cowboys. What it does mean is about being empowered. And in our case, we were empowered because at the time, senior management that we reported directly to didn't understand what we were really doing, didn't want to figure it out, and just hoped that we didn't get them fired and had a deliverable that actually worked and meant something. So we did a lot of things that turn out to be standard Agile practices. We didn't know it at the time. We had stand-ups every morning. We argued in front of a whiteboard, a lot of blood, sweat, and tears. A lot of every once in a while sit back and make nice and figure out how to improve our process. A lot of focus, a lot of iterations. We were using Common Lisp object system, which I wouldn't wish on anyone nowadays, but it was really innovative at the time. And it allowed us to basically see the results of our work, almost kind of a natural continuous integration, if you will, using that language system and the interpreters. But anyways, cycle time is really important. I think the tighter your cycle time probably points to a higher performing team. So when you start out with 2 or 4 week sprints, and there's nothing wrong with staying there for the rest of your life, by the way, what tends to happen is as you embrace other methodologies beyond Scrum, as you start to maybe get bold and create your own hybrids, as you modify your own process, you start to hear these weird stories about teams going to half-day sprints, or teams going down to 3 or 4 people and having daily sprints, having task decomposition that is mind-boggling, and that they don't even bother to point it because it's always measured in hours. It's 1, 2, or 3 hours. I'm not saying that that's the right answer to even the typical team or the typical type of work that you're doing, but what I will say is task decomposition is hard. So most teams don't want to do it, which means they'll leave tasks to be rather large, which means they'll point high, which means they'll take up a lot of the runway of a sprint, which means as you fail or as you run into trouble or as you need to refactor or reconsider your approach, you run out of time quickly. And you also tend to experience a lot of that in isolation. So cycle time, all these things are interconnected, right? Cycle time brings more sunlight, brings more collaboration, brings more communication, brings more rigorous decomposition. There's a lot of things that happen when you push your frequency. And when you think about it, now you don't have to explain to an executive about your sprint or your cadence or your ceremonies or what it's time for today. All you have to explain is you want a tight feedback loop and you want to bring things to light quickly so that you can either succeed or fail quickly and then build on that and move on. These are concepts that every executive will understand. Every executive understands a test market or a test product or floating an idea and getting feedback, giving something a voice, giving it a name, a label, a technique, a picture, a visualization, whatever the case may be. The more tangible something is, the more we can assess its value. And if you want to drive something to be tangible, you got to shorten your frequencies between conceptual phases, design phases, implementation phases, and demonstration phases. You want to get to demonstration as quickly as possible. This is the trickiest one. And I'm going to argue that our industry actually doesn't pay enough attention to this. I think it's a problem, but you'd need senior executives to go into a confessional to know for sure, and that's never going to happen. I like the word empowerment. Well, actually, let me be honest. I love autonomous teams. I love self-managed, self-organized, self-directed. I actually do use those terms a lot. Most of the time, I'm using them on purpose to provoke my boss or the executive team I report to, because I'm trying to test them. And what I'm testing for is this. Most senior managers are intimidated by the concepts of autonomous teams and self-organized teams. They're intimidated for two reasons. One is you have to appreciate what qualities were recognized and rewarded on their journey to make it all the way to the C-suite. I can assure you it's not the open-minded, touchy-feely, flow, mindset, autonomy kind of culture that we all know is worth driving towards. That's not what got them to wherever they're at. What got them there is consistency, discipline, conservative decision-making, steady at the wheel, tight control, accountability, and perception, because perception is everything. Perception that they run a tight ship, that things are organized, that they are in control, and that their team is competent and executes well, right? So they don't know what it means to all of a sudden write a check and sponsor an autonomous team. That sounds rather radical, right? I'm letting go of a lot of control. I'm not sure if these people on this team are really at the right level to make the decisions that have the potential impact that these decisions have. There's a lot of angst and a lot of anxiety to work through. So I don't like to use that term out of the gate, and I don't like to get all excited about waving those flags because it makes the rest of the organization nervous. You have to remember that most organizations, as they may mature over a number of years and they grow in size, most processes and guidelines are designed to insulate failure and liability. Someone takes a chance and it proves to be a bad idea, and instead of thinking, oh, that's great, look at how much we learned so quickly by this person thinking outside the box or pushing the envelope or driving things forward quickly, that's not the typical mindset. The typical mindset is, what's the exposure? How much did this cost us? We can't afford for this to happen every Tuesday. What do we do to make sure this never happens again? Right? So that's why we have layers and bureaucracies and a very crisp pyramid, and things are very orderly. So if you're going to empower people, you have to use words that the typical executive will embrace and take comfort in. Ownership is a great word. Ownership and accountability. Use that instead of autonomy and self-managed, and you'll get 100 miles to every one you would otherwise. Talk about empowerment and driving ideas, observations, input, and maybe some decision-making towards the front line. That's another concept that most execs can relate to. They'll do it cautiously. They do realize, we've all learned this lesson, right, since the Vietnam War, at least in American corporate culture. There's a lot of parallels between the military, sports, and business, unfortunately. And one of the things Vietnam taught us very distinctly was that when decisions are made at the Pentagon and orders and guidelines are phoned in from the Pentagon, things don't go well for guys on the Hill. So we have this appreciation that the closer you are to the front line, the closer you are to where things are real, where the rubber meets the road, and your observations are true and more pure, and your sense of action normally more on point. Now the problem is that the most highly rewarded staff is normally not on the front line. The most highly rewarded and trusted staff are normally in the C-suite and in very senior positions where they're accountable for big groups of people and big pockets of money. So it's a little bit of a paradox on how to sort that out, and you want to do it slowly and gently. But when we talk about empowerment and teams, we're really talking about how to drive requirements, ideas, input, observations, and decisions as close to the front line, or as the nerds like to say, edge of network, as possible, right as close to where the machines meet the humans again, and things translate into immediate value. One note I have about team size, it's an interesting conundrum. And I'll just want to leave you with two concepts. One's fairly well known, one's not discussed very often. The one that's well known are what I call the nodes of communication or collaboration, right? You all know that when you're a team of 5, you have, what is it? I can never remember the right numbers, 10, 12, or 15 points of communication. That starts to go up, not just directly, but logarithmically as you add numbers. And there's this healthy amount of lines of communication and lines of relationship that we're capable of carrying as human beings, which means as you go from a team of 5 to a team of 10 to a team of 15 to a team of 20, your emotional safety, your trust, your maturity and familiarity, the rhythm, the flow of how you interact and collaborate as humans starts to break down considerably. So we know there's a limit to team size based on effective communication and collaboration. So that's one constraint that we have to keep in mind. So the answer is not just to automatically have teams of 4, 5, or 6 people, because there's another concept that we don't talk about a lot, and that's cognitive burden. If you want your Agile team to be their own DevOps practitioners, to also be product experts, to be directly connected and understand the voice of the customer, to also manage the contributions that each other is making in terms of performance management, to also adhere to the methodology, the framework, the ceremony, the process, the guidelines, everything that you need in order to appropriately within your organization conceptualize and then deliver software. That stuff adds up fast. Add in a tech stack that's got 5 or 6 layers, 7 or 8 different libraries, cutting edge tools, new language variations, and all of a sudden you've got people who are suffering from imposter syndrome, who are getting burned out, who are ready to have a nervous breakdown. And despite the fact that they're used to being among the smartest people in the room, they're not feeling it, and the delivery isn't happening like it used to. That happens real easy, especially nowadays, because we continue to branch out and stratify what it means to have a tool or a technique, which is a great thing, unless you're expected to be a full stack developer and be able to handle any challenge at any point in the whole life cycle and the whole stack and ecosystem of your application. Stuff gets hairy really fast. So you got to balance this cognitive burden with these nodes of communication and with this other third element, which is really hard to pin down, which is, I'll call it organizational pragmatism. It's great to have people on your team that understand how the rest of the org works and can kind of find their way through it. It may not be the smartest thing in the world to do. Different roles or skills within an organization have different sensitivities, are used to different levels or layers of approval or of rigor and documentation, things that may be counterproductive to your Agile team. And the idea that you'll throw 7 people in a small room and together they understand how the entire rest of the org works, and they can kind of shuffle things through and force things into the pipeline and back out again. When it improves your velocity and your empowerment as a team, that's fantastic. When it starts to ruffle feathers throughout the rest of the organization and has people second guessing things and maybe paying you a visit the day after, asking for a little retrospective on how the heck we spent this money or made this decision or did that thing, that starts to build friction, and friction is not your friend. So all things to consider. All right, this is the cheat, improvement. All Agile methodologies and frameworks have this notion of some type of continuous improvement, some type of better product fit, better organizational alignment, the opportunity to refine, the opportunity to accelerate and create velocity. all in the name of value at the end of the day. That is what it's all about. I love the trend of customer value, of value-based in general, value-based outcomes, which is now really popular in the healthcare field. I will propose to you that there are 3 mechanisms of value that you need to keep in mind so that you don't get overly focused on one. If you're going to be overly focused on one, well, the best one to pick is customer value. That tends to solve most problems, right? If you can appeal to me as a customer and demonstrate value, and again, use these shared concepts to drive value so that whether you're a business executive or you're an Agile purist, at some point the semantics all intersect. You don't have to really live in each other's world. You can fall back on those 5 things that I contend matter most, and that's the shared zone where all these things intersect. But value is important. So you have customer value, then you have business value. It might be about cost optimization. It might be about pricing strategies or tiers or channels, things that you can exploit more effectively. Business value is an important consideration when you look at your opportunity to improve. And then there's a weird one, which I call market value. Now, I'm just making this up, so feel free to trash it. I think market value is often something you'll hear people talk about when they say, that's table stakes. There are certain things that your application has to do that don't necessarily wow a customer, that don't necessarily create additional business value, but they allow you to be in the room. They allow you to play in a quadrant. They allow you to be considered a meaningful option in an industry vertical. They are things that the market expects in order to feel that there's something there worth looking at, worth exploring. And then as they pull the layers back and dive deeper into your whole value proposition and your application, then out of that emerges more tangible business value and customer value. But these 3 things together, in my mind, create ROI. And I think that market value, being the nebulous term that it is, I like to point out MVPs. I think one area where I don't care what framework you have, where you're at on your Agile journey, the relationship between product and engineering, which is often tenuous at best, the relationship between your Agile delivery team, which I'll say is product and engineering together with the rest of the organization. I can't tell you how many times I hear that MVP is not good enough from the rest of the business. So what normally happens is a product and engineering team looks at their interpretation of customer value and business value, and they look at the Agile principles and Agile values, and they choose an MVP that represents an absolute path of least resistance, something that sees the light of day quickly, something that is useful and can serve as a reasonable vehicle for customers to talk about what they'd like to see next and to give feedback as to what they're seeing right now in front of them. It rarely intersects with the business notion of minimal viable product, which is something that they feel is worth promoting, something that's worth sending out, something that's worth going through all the machinations of the feedback loop and the test and the validation and the verification and building the training and the support and the operations and all the things that you have to do. So I just throw this in there that when it comes to how we improve, I'm going to argue that the art of the MVP is still one of the most vexing things to nail and get right, regardless of what your methodology is. Market value. It's not always true, but depending on your industry and your application, an example would be seamless transition between desktop user experience and a mobile user experience. When I see that, I don't ask how much of a premium you'd like me to pay per month for that experience, I expect it, right? As a business, it doesn't create business value for me because it's actually blowing out my cost. It's another channel to test. It could be more complication in the tech stack. There's a variety of issues there. But it has market value because I'm not going to be taken seriously in the marketplace if you go to hit me on your mobile device in at least a number of circumstances and I fall flat. I either don't even show up or I show up and I look ridiculous and I behave and perform ridiculous as an application. So at the end of the day, in my mind, building advocacy is about traceability. You've got to take the challenges that you're facing as a team, and normally your challenges are going to have to do with the clarity and consistency of requirements and how they flow, being able to stay ahead of your sprint, having an actual prioritized and pointed backlog, and of course time. We'll talk about time a little bit here in a second. That really sucks, by the way. There's no easy answer to some of this, but there are consistent things you can do to wear down people who are making your life difficult. But the key is to take those things that matter, those basic concepts, and trace them to your Agile challenges. You don't want to lecture the business about how important it is not to interrupt a sprint. You don't want to get into why the sprint is kind of sacred and it runs for 2 weeks and why you have planning and why you have a backlog. You don't want to get into all that stuff. You just want to get into the basic concepts about, like, for instance, focus. Like, yeah, that's great. We will get on this right away. Well, what's right away mean? Well, I think in order to maintain our focus and the frequency of our deliverable, in order to remain an agile business, we have to get certain things done. In this case, getting to your request right away is about 7 days from now. And sometimes that's the right answer, and sometimes the right answer is 7 hours from now, and it's not your decision. And you just have to learn to roll with that stuff. But simply taking a purist approach and arguing and explaining that this is not what you learned in training, that normally works for about a quarter. And the reason it works is because everyone's still got it fresh in their memory how much money they spent on training. So the idea that it's automatically proving to be wasteful or ineffective is not pleasant. So you can make the "this is not how we're supposed to do it" argument, at least for a quarter or two, and you probably still get some tepid support. Beyond that, you're not going to get any support because, again, we don't care about the ceremony and the methodology. We care about business value. You've got to make your case in terms that your executive sponsors understand are basic business tenets, even ones that we're constantly challenged to deliver on. Here's a lot of stuff that I think we all kind of already know. You got to have buy-in up front. If your organization isn't talking about cultural change and about rethinking how they empower people, their layers of reporting or management, you're in trouble before you begin. What I like to emphasize, and again, I don't think that we talk about this enough in the industry. Yeah, it's easy to put stuff at the feet at the C-suite or the most senior executive. You know, you've got to understand the basic things. You've got to understand the cultural implications. You've got to buy into it. You've got to champion it, or the rest of the organization is going to fail. Then you have everyone getting trained who has to implement. They've got to show up every day and have an effective stand-up. They've got to have an effective sprint planning session. They've got to do their job. I'm going to argue that the most valuable spot and the weakest spot in most transformations is right smack in the middle. Senior managers, directors, architects, principal engineers, Those of you who have the most experience in your team is always looked to for leadership. Those of you who serve as the forward eyes and ears of senior executives, you've got to build that bridge and paint those pictures and reinforce those messages. You've got to be the translator. You've got to be the truth teller. You've got to be the investigator. You've got to be the one that walks around with a fistful of batteries ready to put a flashlight on everything and create the sunlight. It's a big chasm to get from the C-suite to the Agile delivery team and stay in sync and understand those concepts that matter in the middle, right, when you get past the semantics. The only way to really get there effectively is when mid-level management and senior technical staff make the extra effort to communicate and collaborate up, which they often don't do well. It's easy to collaborate and communicate sideways and downstream. It's not always easy to do it upstream in your organization for a whole bunch of reasons. And whatever creates that hesitancy, I'm going to argue that mid-level managers and personnel have to overcome those hesitancies, and that ends up making a huge difference in your ability to sustain an Agile program. It is good to challenge your senior leadership team to put it to the test in small, meaningful ways from their perspective before you explain to them how you're going to convert, 100 plus staff and a $20 million a year operating budget for software design, delivery, development, operations, and all that kind of stuff. So it's really good to challenge them. Ask them to apply an Agile principle to what they're doing in the C-suite. Ask them to think about what it means in other departments before you write the big check and take all your technical people and try to get them either to begin Agile or to take Agile to the next level. A good sign that your company's not ready to truly be an Agile organization is the fact that everyone continues to scramble 3 weeks out of every year to nail down their budget and their priorities and their projects for 12 months. And then they go to sleep until that same season approaches again in whatever your annual cycle is. That's the first thing I challenge whenever I go to a new place, which is why I'm probably often going to new places. If you're going to map out a 12-month budget and project prioritization, and then you're going to talk about being Agile with all the cool kids, you're just blowing smoke. You're not going to get there as an organization. Now, everyone needs something to kind of anchor down on an annualized basis, because that's what much of corporate America is built on. That's okay. There's no reason why you can't augment that and reevaluate that, why you can't refine that. Hey, there's a term that's familiar. There's a whole bunch of Scrum terms that are going to be familiar that you can actually ask the C-suite to experiment with and to think about and to ask themselves if they're ready to do that as leaders. Because if they're not ready to do those small little experiments as senior leaders, they're not ready to support you when times get tough with your Agile transformation. They'll write the check, you'll get trained and certified, and then it'll all go to hell in about 6 months, right? So you want to ask them to prove that they're ready. I mentioned OKRs. I don't get all excited about any one thing, so I'm not saying OKRs are a silver bullet. But if you can convince an executive team, again, if it's the C-suite, great. If it's not, it's whatever is practical and meaningful in your organization. If you can convince them to look at monthly and quarterly OKRs and to think about how to make those small yet meaningful and actually actionable and accountable, and they're willing to do that, and if they show even any kind of success in doing that as an organization top to bottom, you've at least got the right foundation. For me, it's a good litmus test. I've never seen an organization fail miserably at anything even remotely resembling OKRs and then have a wildly successful Agile transformation with their software teams. Never seen it. I have seen the opposite. I've seen lots of bumps and hiccups that get solved over time because OKRs are a safe, easy way to start to think in terms of agility. Because think about it, an OKR is time boxed, so there's the notion of frequency. It has focus, it has metrics. It actually has an implied retrospective because it translates into performance review of some type or an assessment of an organization's ability to pick the right OKRs and do the right thing. So there's a lot of good stuff there. One of my favorite terms, and I'm already lost in my own slides, but I think I mentioned blast radius here somewhere. When you look for agile examples and experiments, whether they're technical or not, the notion of, here we go, a limited blast radius. Tightly aligned but loosely coupled, I believe that's a Spotify term. I think that's a great expression. Most agile efforts, whether they're technical or not, should start that way. Tightly aligned, loosely coupled. Here's some shared objectives. Why do you bother going agile? Again, forget the ceremonies and the agile buzzwords. These are basic things that show up in most business strategy and planning sessions and performance assessments. So these are terms that executives can relate to. This is part of what you should look at for traceability. Here are some typical headwinds. These are things that your organization has to overcome. So right in the middle, manage time and cost. Focus on time and cost. Obsess over time and cost. I can't tell you how many times either myself personally or my friends or colleagues or other people I just meet in my travels tell me that the time deadlines and the pressure for time and cost, predictability, consistency kills their agile program with senior stakeholders every friggin' time. How do you get past that? Well, I mentioned MVP because I mentioned what I think are meaningful expectations that are always bigger in the eyes of the business than they are in the eyes of your agile teams. And I mentioned the things that I think matter, those 5 concepts: frequency, focus, empowerment, improvement, whatever the other one was. You've got to shift the conversation. And the only way to shift the conversation is to demonstrate the life of your application on a weekly basis. Daily is even better. Not that executives are going to show up every day because they're all excited about how you progressed from yesterday. Your team should be excited about that. The C-suite's not going to be that excited about that. But if they're waiting 3 to 6 to 9 months for the ta-da moment, and they've been driving towards this date with a certain expectation of a business capability that costs them a certain amount of dollars, that's going to get them a certain ROI, you're probably screwed. And you're screwed because I don't care how many years you've been doing this, the moment you venture into any kind of new territory with new functionality, new tech stack, new channel, whatever the case may be, your ability to accurately predict how hard something is not good. And time proves that every single time. So how do you shift off of that obsession of time and cost? You have to get obsessed about those other things that matter and focus on customer value. You have to convince your C-suite that having certain milestones and targets and stakes in the ground where we feel we're going up another level, that's worth an advertising campaign or a new pricing tier or a new investment for the business, that's great. But those should be followers and not leaders. And what they should be following is the weekly improvement in your Net Promoter Score, the weekly improvement in your customer satisfaction, the weekly improvement in the usability of your app, the weekly demonstration of an expanded footprint in terms of capability or performance or features or functionality, whatever the case may be. Get them to buy into the growth of the child, not waiting for the college degree. Get them excited about learning how to walk, riding a bicycle. Get them excited about making it through grade school. Getting them excited about finally being able to sink a free throw. All these little things that we take for granted professionally, but are really meaningful personally. You've got to create that same dynamic at work. You've got to get them to invest in the infant evolution of your application and not wait for your application to be ready to move out and pay its own rent and start making good money, right? That's not the way to do it. And there's no easy answer to that, but what I can tell you is when you can talk in meaningful terms, when you can stop making their eyes water with all of your Scrum fanciness, and when you can just show them working software, their confidence grows, and their willingness to buy into incremental value instead of tiered value in big giant steps grows with it. And that changes the conversation. It also changes your contracts and business relationships. It changes the value proposition of your organization. Then it really is about continuous improvement and about customer value delivery and less about trying to move from tier 1 to tier 2 or from grade B up to grade A, whatever the case may be. I'm going to wrap up with what was originally intended to be kind of an equal dose, which is, okay, let's say you've survived a good Agile transformation and you've established Agile maturity as a software delivery team or as a program of product and engineering together. Now what do you do to get the rest of the organization to embrace business agility? It's in your own best interest because all along you've probably been negotiating with stakeholders that are touch points, that are dependencies, because you need them to buy into your process in order for you to continue to get along if you depend on each other, right? A great example would be customer support, sales and marketing. They're absolutely tied to exactly where you're at in terms of application maturity and software delivery. So you're kind of joined at the hip. If they've been around for a year or two and they're not starting to drink the Kool-Aid, then I don't know how you're surviving. It's probably a rough run, but you're doing it, so God bless you. Keep doing it. But it's in your best interest to get them excited about Agile as well. And the good news is, all of the business trends and business pressures are driving them to the same types of concepts. So look for opportunities to share what matters. And here, you can now offer some very tangible advice because here's a bunch of, maybe concepts is not the right term. Let's call them artifacts. Here are a bunch of things that probably look real familiar to you. Take any one of them by themselves, and they're actually fairly easy to explain and they're fairly easy to get your arms around. You don't have to throw your whole department process and hierarchy up into the air and reassemble it on the way down. You can do little pieces at a time. Again, look for tightly aligned, loosely coupled, maybe high impact, small blast radius ways to convince another department to try to embrace an Agile concept. Probably not going to get accounting to get all excited about Agile. But you could get workforce or human resources excited about Agile. I've seen that happen. I've seen marketing and sales get excited about Agile. General operations, customer care, customer support, they get excited about Agile. And of course, any group driving a product or service, that's a no-brainer. you can take any combination of these things and probably see some lift in your ability to have a better product or deliver and support a better service by embracing those concepts. Nothing to do with software, nothing to do with technology, doesn't matter. And the reason it doesn't matter is you go back to those 5 things that I contend do matter. The focus, the frequency, the improvement, the empowerment. I'm really giving short shift to one of them. What's the 5th one that I keep forgetting? Thank you. Only the most important one. Information radiators. It's amazing how you can go to any department or any team and put Post-it notes on the wall about what's going on and what different people are doing and get immediate lift. Immediate lift. And that's because we're all liars when it comes to how effective Microsoft Office and email and everything else is. That stuff does not tie us together. You can SharePoint to your heart's content. It makes no difference. But create an honest radiator of any type, even if you create it in SharePoint. But if your mindset is, I need an information radiator that is easy, that is obvious, that provides some sunlight, some insight, and I guarantee you get immediate lift for any team working on anything. And now all of a sudden they're starting to see that there might be something to this Agile stuff, and it starts to happen. All right, well, that was the first time I ran through that. I redid that whole deck, by the way, over lunch because I hated what I had originally. So, thank you.